The valley of Swat wakes slowly. Mist folds itself between the hills, and the river hums beneath it like a distant drum, steady, patient, unhurried. Somewhere along the stone terraces, where the fields taper into narrow paths, smoke rises from a potter's kiln. A cockerel crows once, and then again, as though the morning itself needs reminding. The day begins not with noise, but with preparation. It is the 2nd century of our era, though no one in the valley counts the years that way. To the villagers, this is simply another morning under the rule of distant kings, perhaps the Kushans now, or someone else. Empires come and go along the passes, but the mountains remain, holding their silence. In a small workshop built of mud and timber, a sculptor sits before a block of gray schiststone. His hands are steady, his tools arranged in careful sequence: hammer, point chisel, flat chisel, rasp, and a small brush made of horsehair. The light enters through a high slit in the wall, tracing the dust that floats in the air like pale incense. He has carved for 40 years, yet each day still begins the same way, a moment of stillness before the first strike of the chisel. He is called Agita, though the name will never be recorded. No inscription bears it. No traveler will write it down. Yet it is Agita who shapes the faces of the Buddhas that will later fill monasteries and stupas across Gandhara, serene, symmetrical, and almost human. He works not for fame, but for balance. For him, carving is prayer. The stone and its memory, the stone of Swat, is a patient companion. It lies layered in the hills, formed from river silt and the slow pressure of ages. When struck correctly, it splits cleanly. When struck hastily, it splinters. The sculptors learned long ago that the stone responds to rhythm, not force. Each tap of the chisel must fall like a heartbeat, even, calm, precise. Before he begins, Agita runs his fingers over the surface, reading the veins and subtle shifts in texture. His master once told him, "The Buddha is already inside the stone. You only need to let him breathe." So he starts by removing what does not belong. Tiny flakes fall like gray snow. The noise is gentle, a soft clicking, like raindrops on wood. Hours pass in this quiet percussion. The sun rises higher, the air warms, and the faint scent of burning sesame oil drifts in from a nearby shrine in the courtyard outside. An apprentice grinds pigments red from ochre, green from malachite, and gold dust from broken ornaments. When the statue is complete, these colors will be mixed into paste and brushed onto its robe. But that is far away yet. For now, there is only the gray stone, the hand, and the sound. The rhythm of work by mid-morning. Other sculptors join the rhythm. Some carve lotus petals. Others shape the folds of a robe. A senior craftsman traces curls of hair along the Buddha's head, each curl identical, each line looping with perfect repetition. It is not decoration, but discipline. Gandharan workshops were communities, families of artisans, bound by apprenticeship rather than blood. There were master sculptors, stone polishers, pigment mixers, and sometimes Greek-trained artists whose ancestors had come centuries earlier, when Alexander's soldiers drifted east and stayed behind. The style they carried with them, the arch of a brow, the drape of a toga, merged with local sensibilities. Out of that meeting came the unique face of Gandhara, a Buddha who looked at once Indian and Mediterranean, earthly and divine, But Agita and his fellows do not think of these things. They do not ponder influence or heritage. Their minds are narrow as the chisel tip. Each breath, each stroke, repeats the ancient vow to see perfection in stillness. At noon, they pause for a meal of barley bread and goat's milk. No one speaks loudly. Words scatter the focus that carving builds. After eating, Ajita walks outside to stretch his legs. The valley hums with distant sound, a flute, a hammer, a child chasing a goat. The wind carries dust from the road, where merchants pass with their camels loaded with silk and spices. He watches them for a moment and wonders where their goods will go, perhaps to Taxila, or, farther still, to the Roman world, where men in robes buy statues of strange Eastern gods. He has never seen the sea, never traveled beyond these mountains. Yet the faces he carves will cross oceans. They will rest in temples he will never imagine. The apprentices questioning the shade of the workshop. Agita's apprentice, a boy named Samila, hesitates before asking, "Master, how do you know when the Buddha's face is finished?" Agita smiles without looking up. When he begins to look back at you, he says. The boy frowns, unsure whether this is an answer or a riddle. Agita continues, carving, eyes half-lidded. "It is not the stone that changes," he murmurs. "It is your seeing. The lines you carve are only mirrors." This is how Gandharan art was taught, not through manuals or design sketches, but through slow imitation and long silence. Each apprentice learned by watching, listening, and waiting. Mistakes were inevitable, even expected. The stone taught patience by breaking Samila, once struck too hard and cracked a statue's cheek. He had wept, terrified that the Buddha himself would disapprove. Agita only said, "Then you will carve again." And so he did, again and again, until the rhythm of his hands matched the calm of his teacher's breath, the weight of belief for the sculptors of Swat. Art was not a matter of fame or beauty. It was devotion made visible. Every statue they carved was a vessel for the unseen, a form that reminded others of formlessness. The monks who came to commission the statues never hurried them. They knew that the process itself was sacred. Each block of stone passed through many hands, from quarry to workshop to shrine. Along the way, the sculptors whispered prayers. "May the hands that carve be steady. May the mind that shapes be clear. May this form awaken peace in those who look upon it." When the carving was done, the statue would be carried on a wooden sled to a monastery, perhaps to Bhatkara or Shin, where domed stupors rose like pale moons against the hills. There, it would be placed in a niche, painted, and offered flowers. Then, as centuries passed, it would stand in silence, through sun and rain, through kingdoms rising and falling. No one could have guessed that many of these Buddhas would one day be buried, broken and forgotten, or that, long after, foreign archaeologists would unearth their fragments and wonder who made them. But that forgetting lies far in the future. For now, in this moment, Agita's chisel still sings. The afternoon stillness, the valley's light softens toward evening. Birds circle the river. The fields grow quiet. The sculptors clean their tools carefully, oiling the metal tips and wrapping them in cloth. Dust clings to their robes. Their fingers ache, but do not tremble. Before leaving, Ajita wipes the stone surface with a damp cloth. The faint curve of a face has begun to emerge, a brow, a nose, the beginnings of a smile that seems almost imperceptible. He studies it without judgment. It is not finished. Nothing ever is. The apprentice gathers the stone chips scattered on the floor. They will be mixed into plaster or ground for pigment. Nothing is wasted outside. The sky turns the color of ash and rose petals. The scent of cooking millet drifts from nearby homes. Women call children to dinner. The world returns to its ordinary rhythm, indifferent to art or prayer. A Gita sits for a while on the threshold, gazing at the hills. Somewhere beyond them, perhaps, a messenger from the Kushan court is carrying news of a new tax or a new war. But such things belong to other men. His task is smaller, slower, older, to free peace from stone. Dreams of the Buddha that night. Before sleep, Ajita sharpens his chisels by lamplight. He listens to the whetstone rasp against metal. It is a soothing sound. Outside, the river murmurs again, constant as thought. When he finally lies down, his palms still remember the feel of the stone. He dreams of faces, not one, but many. Some are serene, some fractured. In the dream, he walks among unfinished statues, touching each one gently. Each turns to look at him, their eyes calm, forgiving. He wakes before dawn. The mist is back, coiling over the river. The workshop waits. The chisel rests, cool and expectant. And once more, the day will begin with silence. A quiet question history will not remember Agita or Samila. Their names will vanish, their tools rust, their Buddhas crumble. But in every surviving fragment, in the faint groove of a lip or the curve of a robe, their rhythm remains. Centuries later, travelers and scholars will study these carvings and speak of Greco-Buddhist synthesis or the fusion of East and West. They will analyze the gestures, the iconography, the proportions, yet none of them will hear the sound of the chisel or the long pauses between strikes. To carve such peace into stone, was it art or was it prayer? And when the hands that carved grew still, did the Buddha they shaped keep dreaming? Morning returns to the Swat Valley like a familiar guest. The mist is softer today, the river slower. From the workshop rooftops, thin threads of smoke rise into pale light. Every day begins the same, quietly, humbly, yet each carries a slight difference in its breath, as though the mountains themselves exhale with the sculptors. Ajita wakes before the birds. He washes his hands in cold water, touching his eyes with the same motion used for prayer. His tools lie waiting on a folded cloth, the chisel worn smooth from decades of use, the hammer dark with oil. He feels for them as one might for old friends outside. Samila, the apprentice, is already sweeping the floor, gathering the stone dust into small piles. The air smells faintly of wet clay and sesame. Somewhere, a monk's bell chimes. It is the hour of beginnings. The workshops circle by mid-morning. The courtyard is alive with motion, quiet motion, measured motion. Gandharan workshops were not solitary rooms, but living circles of craft. A dozen artisans might share the same space, each devoted to one part of the whole. One carved heads, another robes, another the intricate halos that framed the Buddha's calm dot at the edge of the courtyard. A man named Philo, son of a Greek father and local mother, hunches over a slab of marble. His tools differ slightly from Agita's, finer in shape, more suited for smooth contours. The other sculptors call him the Carver from the West, though he has never seen Greece. His father once told him of white temples by the sea, but those stories feel distant, as though belonging to a forgotten dream. Philo's technique, however, carries traces of that ancestry: the curve of a robe, the realism of an eyelid, the subtle twist of a neck. These forms blend gently into the Indian sensibility for calm expression and symbolic gesture. Together, they form something entirely new, the art that travelers later call Gandharan. Agita often watches Philo's hands, learning without words. They do not compete. The workshop breathes as one body, its many hands guided by a single vow to give peace a visible shape. The teacher's patience in Gandhara apprenticeships could last decades. There were no certificates, no formal schools, only the slow passage of skill from one hand to another. The master's first lesson was patience, the last humility. Agita's teacher, long gone now, once told him, "The chisel cuts you before it cuts the stone." At the time, he did not understand. Now he does. The first cuts are always in the mind, the impatience, the desire for perfection. Only when those are carved away can the work truly begin. So, as Samila fumbles with his new chisel, Agita does not correct him immediately. He lets the boy struggle, lets the stone answer his haste. When a chip breaks, he says softly, "Listen to it." The stone speaks first. Samila kneels, eyes wide, as though the block might whisper. Agita smiles faintly. "Do not strike to command," he says. "Strike to ask." In these words lies the quiet philosophy of Gandhara, an art that listens before it speaks, that measures creation not in speed or mastery, but in stillness. Tools of silence. Each tool has its own sound. The point chisel opens the rough form, a quick staccato of taps. The flat chisel smooths the planes, longer, slower, almost melodic. The rasp hums softly, turning edges into breath, and the final brush dusts away the fragments, revealing what was always waiting underneath. The sculptors say the stone responds differently depending on the day. Some mornings it yields easily, as though eager; others it resists. They blame the weather, the humidity, or their own unsettled hearts. At times, Agita will pause mid-stroke, simply holding the chisel above the stone, waiting for his breathing to align. When it does, the next tap falls perfectly, barely a sound. This is why Gandharan sculpture feels alive, not because it moves, but because it was carved in harmony with stillness. The sculptor's inner rhythm becomes the statue's outer calm. A visitor from the monastery one afternoon, a monk from the great monastery at Takht-i-Bahi, arrives. His name is Dharmapala, and he carries a scroll wrapped in linen. He greets Agita with folded hands. The abbot requests 3 new Buddhas, the monk says, for the meditation hall. They will sit in a row, facing the morning sun. Agita bows. 3, he repeats. Of what size? Life size, the monk replies. They must be serene, not royal faces of rest, not command, the abbot says. Let them be carved by hands that have known silence. Agita nods. He will take the work. As the monk departs, Samila whispers, "Master, will you go to the monastery yourself?" "Yes," Agita says. It is good to see where the Buddhas will sit. The stone listens better when it knows its home. That evening, they prepare for the journey, a slow walk through winding paths. past terraced fields and shrines where wind bells hang from fig trees. The boy carries the tools wrapped in cloth. The master carries only a small pouch of rice and a flask of water. Takht-i-Bahi. The mountain monastery. The monastery sits high on a ridge where the earth falls away into deep green valleys. From a distance, it appears like a cluster of nests clinging to the hillside, stone cells, courtyards, and domed shrines connected by narrow stairs. At the gate, the monks greet them with quiet smiles. Their robes are simple, their eyes calm. The scent of burning sandalwood drifts through the corridors. A Gita bows before the main stupa, tracing the carvings with his fingertips. Lotus petals, small figures of guardians' inscriptions half worn by wind. He feels the work of his own teacher somewhere in these stones. Inside the meditation hall, the abbot speaks softly. We seek not grandeur, but gentleness. The Buddha's face should remind the tired of rest and the restless of stillness. Ajita listens. He has heard such words before, but they always sound new. He touches the floor, feeling its cool smoothness. This is where the statues will sit. This is where silence will take shape. The road of influences. Ajita descends the mountain. Days later, he passes a caravan, merchants from Bactria, leading camels heavy with wool and carved ivory. One of them stops to admire the small Buddha pendant hanging from Ajita's neck. Your work? The merchant asks. Ajita nods. Beautiful, the man says in a thick accent. In my land, men carve gods with many arms. But yours, he pauses, searching for the right word. Yours look as if they are about to breathe. Ajita smiles faintly. The compliment passes through him like wind through leaves. Beauty is not his aim. Quietness is. Yet it is through such encounters that Gandharan art travels. Merchants carry small statues as gifts or talismans. Monks carry them along pilgrimage routes. Roman traders buy them for their shrines. The soft curve of a Gandharan Buddha will one day be seen in faraway lands, its calm expression unchanging, its origin half-forgotten. The workshop of many faiths back in the valley. Work resumes. The sculptors gather in the workshop courtyard. Indians, Greeks, Persians, and even one man from across the Oxus who still wears his hair in the nomad's knot. There are as many languages as there are hammers, yet silence unites them. They eat together, work together, pray separately, but with the same bowed heads. When disputes arise about payment, design, or stone quality, they settle them with quiet discussion. The art itself is their common tongue. The Buddha's half-smile bridges the distance between them, Philo once said. We carve the same piece with different alphabets. Ajita liked that. The valley, after all, has always been a crossroads of armies, traders, languages, and now of beliefs. To carve a statue here is to carve the memory of coexistence, carving the face weeks pass. The three Buddhas for Takht-i-Bahi begin to take form. The bodies are easy. Broad shoulders, folded robes, hands resting in meditation. But the faces are hardest. Each feature must suggest infinite calm without losing human softness. Ajita works at dusk when the light is gentle. When shadows reveal what brightness hides, he uses the smallest chisel for the corners of the mouth. One slip could ruin the expression. So Mila watches silently, holding a lamp. Why do you carve the mouth last? He asks. Because peace begins there, Agita says. It spreads from the lips to the eyes. The rest of the face only follows. The chisel moves again. Tap, tap, whisper. The lips emerge, neither smiling nor frowning. Just enough curve to suggest compassion, enough restraint to suggest detachment. When he steps back, the face seems to breathe. Samila exhales, without realizing he'd been holding his breath. The sculptors, viewing the evening. The sculptors gather before the unfinished Buddhas. A small oil lamp burns between them. Philo recites a verse in halting Sanskrit. Others listen. May all who look upon this image remember the quiet within themselves. May our hands do no harm. May our hearts remain still, like the mountain stone. This is the sculptor's vow, passed down through generations. It is not written anywhere. It lives only in memory and repetition. Agita repeats it softly, eyes closed. The vow is not to the gods, nor to patrons, but to the act itself, to carve with care, to honor imperfection, to leave behind something gentler than what was found. The hidden signature in Gandhara. Sculptors rarely signed their work. Occasionally, one might inscribe a small symbol under a base, a lotus, a swirl, a single initial, not for glory, but as a whisper of existence. Agita, too, leaves a mark beneath one of the Buddhas, a simple curve shaped like a half moon. It is not meant to be found. Perhaps centuries later, an archaeologist will brush away dust and pause, wondering who made it. Perhaps not. For Agita, it is enough to know that a trace of his breath remains sealed inside the stone. Evening reflections. When the day's labor ends, Agita walks along the river. The water glows bronze under the setting sun. Pebbles click beneath his sandals. He thinks of his teacher, of Philo, of Samila, and of the faces that will outlast them all. He wonders if the Buddhas, once complete, will feel lonely sitting in the monastery hall. Then he smiles at the absurdity of the thought. Loneliness belongs to men, not to those who have transcended it. Still, the question lingers. Does the calm they carve ever reach them? Or does peace only live in the stone, never in the sculptor's heart? He stops at the riverbank and washes his hands. The water feels cold, almost alive. May I carve better tomorrow, he whispers. Above him, the first stars appear, faint and slow. The valley darkens, but the chisels will wait. They always do. A quiet, unfinishedness Buddhas of Takht-i-Bahi will take months to complete. There will be polishing, painting, blessing. Then they will sit in silence for centuries, their features softened by time. Samila will grow older, Philo will leave for Taxila, and Agita will continue carving until his hands no longer hold steady. But none of that is known yet. Tonight, there is only the sound of insects, the cool smell of stone, and the faint outline of three faces emerging from the mountain's patience. Each day, a little more of the invisible becomes visible. Each strike brings the formless a little closer to form, and somewhere in that rhythm, between noise and stillness, the sculptor finds his own kind of prayer. Dawn opens quietly over the valley. A thin veil of mist clings to the tamarind trees, and the Swat river hums its low, endless hymn. Agita is already awake. His hair has turned the color of the stone he carves, gray with a faint sheen of silver, and his hands are mapped with shallow cuts, each one a record of years in service to silence. Inside the workshop, The air smells of oil and dust. 3 statues stand in the half-light. The Buddhas of Takht-i-Bahi have faces now, serene, symmetrical, softly luminous even in shadow. Each looks slightly different. One gazes downward, one outward, one inward. Agita calls them the 3 silences. Samila enters, carrying a bowl of water. He moves quietly, as if afraid to disturb their stillness. "Shall I begin the polishing, master?" he asks. Agita nods. "Use the fine sand today. The stone should remember your gentleness, not your strength." The final touches, the act of polishing, is slower than carving. It can take weeks of circular motion, each stroke softening the lines until they seem to dissolve. The sculptors say this is where the spirit enters, when the rough surface begins to breathe. Samila works beside Agita, dipping his cloth into water, pressing it against the stone, rubbing until his fingers ache. Between them, the statues slowly shed their dullness. Light gathers on their brows, slides along their shoulders, rests in the folds of their robes. Outside, a group of children passes, their laughter mingling with the rhythm of cloth against stone. None of them look inside. They have seen the Buddhas every day and think of them as part of the furniture of life. Perhaps that is as it should be. The divine made ordinary. Ajita pauses to rest his wrists. His heartbeat seems to echo inside the hollow sound of the workshop. Samila looks up, worried. "Master, shall I fetch water?" Agita smiles faintly. "No, my boy. The stone drinks enough for us both." The blessing ceremony weeks later. When the statues are complete, the monks from Takht-i-Bahi return. They arrive barefoot, carrying incense and a bowl of butter lamps. The abbot examines each statue in silence. His eyes linger on the smallest one, the Buddha with the downward gaze. "Peace rests easily here," he murmurs. "You have given stillness a face." Agita bows. The monks begin the eye-opening ritual, a gentle ceremony where a fine brush touches pigment to the pupils, as though awakening the image. The scent of jasmine fills the air. Bells ring softly. For a brief moment, Agita feels something unfamiliar, pride mixed with melancholy. The Buddhas are no longer his. They belong to the mountain, to the wind, to the generations that will come to sit before them. So Mila stands behind him, hands clasped, whispering the sculptor's vow. May these faces never fade from memory, even when the names do. The journey to the monastery the next morning, the statues are loaded onto wooden sleds. Oxen drag them slowly along the rocky paths, their hooves striking sparks on the stones. Villagers line the road, offering flowers and fruit. The procession moves at the pace of breath, one slow pull at a time. Agita walks beside the smallest Buddha, his palm brushing the cool surface from time to time, as if reassuring it through the journey. The road winds upward through terraces of millet and barley. Clouds drift low across the ridges. By nightfall, they reach Takht-i-Bahi. Torches flicker against the walls of the monastery. The monks chant as the statues are lifted into the meditation hall and placed upon their pedestals. When the chanting ends, the abbot turns to Ajita. "You have carved the calm that words cannot hold," he says. "Will you stay the night?" Ajita bows. "I will stay until dawn." Night at Takht-i-Bahi. Sleeps in a small monk's cell, a clay lamp burning at his side. The walls are bare except for a single lotus painted in red. The sound of the wind seeps through the cracks, mingling with faint echoes of chanting from the shrine. Agita dreams again of faces, hundreds of them, half-carved, half-fierced by time. They surround him in gentle silence, neither joyful nor sorrowful. One of them, the smallest Buddha, opens its eyes and says, "Do not hurry to finish." He wakes before dawn. The dream lingers like mist. He walks to the meditation hall. The Buddhas stand quietly in the pale light of early morning. Their faces seem changed, softer, almost human. He kneels before them, not as their maker, but as their student. "You are more patient than I will ever be," he whispers. Passing the tools back in the valley, weeks later, Ajita grows weaker. His hands tremble slightly when he lifts the chisel. Samila watches in silence. "Your hands have worked enough, master," he says gently. Agita shakes his head. A sculptor's hands never finish. Only the breath does. He picks up a small piece of stone, not to carve a Buddha, but a lotus, simple and rough. It will be his last work. He carves, slowly, each petal an act of farewell. When it is done, he hands the chisel to Samila. "Keep them sharp," he says. "But remember, the sharpest tool is patience." Samila bows, tears filling his eyes. "What should I carve next?" Agita smiles. "Whatever you can carve without pride." That night, as the crickets begin their chorus, Ajita lies down beside his tools. The air smells faintly of schist dust and sesame oil. His breathing slows. Before dawn, the chisel that once rang like a heartbeat grows still. The years that follow time in the valley flows like the river, steady, indifferent. Samila takes over the workshop. His hands are surer now, his silence deeper. He teaches new apprentices the same vow, the same rhythm. Philo's sons come and go, bringing with them bits of Roman bronze and new carving styles. Kingdoms change. The cushions fade. New rulers rise. The monasteries empty, fill again, then empty once more. The Buddhas of Takht-i-Bahi continue to sit in the half-light, their faces unaltered by the centuries of dust that gather around them. The river carves its own valley deeper, as though mimicking the sculptors who once shaped its stones, rediscovering Learly 2,000 years later. Men with notebooks and cameras arrive. They call themselves archaeologists. They measure the broken stupas, brush away the dust, and lift the shattered heads of Buddhas into the sun. One of them finds a small curve etched under a statue's base, a mark shaped like a half-moon. He notes it carefully, wondering what it means. The mark will later be displayed in a museum label as unknown artisan symbol. They will write essays about Greco-Buddhist synthesis, about Kushan patronage, about cross-cultural influence. They will speak of technique and style, of heritage and trade. But none will mention the silence between hammer strikes, the breath before the chisel fell, or the vow whispered at dusk. Those, after all, leave no trace for science to measure. The still faces today, the Buddhas of Takht-i-Bahi, sit once more in the open air. Their stone has faded to the color of dust, their noses chipped, their robes weathered. Yet the calm remains. Travelers stand before them and lower their voices without knowing why. If you listen closely, when the wind moves through the empty halls, it almost sounds like the brushing of cloth against stone, the echo of Samila polishing, the ghost of Ajita's chisel. The valley has changed, villages grown, roads paved, power lines stretching across the hills, but the still faces endure, patient as mountains. And perhaps that was always the true art of Gandhara, not to create beauty that dazzles, but peace that survives forgetting, the question that remains somewhere beneath centuries of dust. A fragment of gray schist still carries the warmth of a Gita's touch. If you could hold it in your hand, cool, smooth, quiet, could you feel the prayer left inside it? Could the calm of the sculptor still reach across time to you? Or does peace, like stone, dream only while it lasts? The morning begins long before the sun appears. In the monastery of Takht-i-Bahi, the air is still cool, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and sesame oil from the lamps that burned through the night. A single bell rings once, not loud, but enough to awaken 100 sleeping breaths. The monks rise quietly, as though surfacing from a shared dream. Robes rustle like dry leaves. Bare feet touch the cold stone floors, polished smooth by generations of walking. No one speaks yet. Words are not needed before dawn. Outside the hills of Swat are dark silhouettes, their ridges soft against the paling sky. A thin ribbon of smoke curls from the kitchen hut where the morning gruel will simmer. The monastery, spread like a honeycomb across the slopes, stirs to life, one breath at a time. The monastery's shape Takht-i-Bahi is less a single building than a quiet city of devotion. Courtyards open into shrines, which open into narrow corridors that wind toward meditation cells. There are storerooms filled with clay pots and manuscripts, stairways leading nowhere. Walls built and rebuilt by countless hands from above. The complex looks like a puzzle made of patience, sandstone blocks fitted together without haste or ambition. Rain and time have softened its edges, but the geometry remains exact, like thought made solid. The monks who live here say that Takht-i-Bahi means the throne of the spring, though the spring itself has long since dried. Still, water finds its way through unseen cracks. At night you can hear it whispering beneath the stone, as if the earth itself chants along with them. The rule of silence when the first light spills over the hills. The silence deepens instead of breaking. The monks file into the central courtyard for the morning recitation. They stand barefoot in rows, palms together, facing the east. Their voices rise softly, low rhythmic syllables of Pali, spoken as though meant not for the world, but for the air itself. No one leads, no one commands. The chant is circular, each voice folding into the next until they are indistinguishable. It sounds less like prayer than like breathing given structure. The lungs of the valley itself exhaling peace. Afterward, they bow once and disperse soundlessly. One monk tends to the lamps, trimming their wicks. Another sweeps the courtyard. 2 younger novices carry buckets of water from a nearby spring, stepping carefully so not to spill. The abbot, old as the monastery's stones, moves among them, offering neither praise nor correction. When the body moves, let the mind rest, he once told them. When the mind moves, let the body rest. Between the two, find the path. The tasks of the day life here is woven from repetition. Each day's labor is the same as the last, and that sameness is the point. At mid-morning, the scribes sit cross-legged in the scriptoria, a long shaded room lined with reed shelves. Their fingers glide across palm leaves, copying sutras in slow, deliberate strokes. The air hums faintly with the sound of reed pens. When the ink dries, it leaves a subtle fragrance, like rain on warm stone. In another courtyard, a group of monks grinds pigments for murals. They crush lapis lazuli into powder, mix it with ghee, and store it in small clay bowls. Color must remember humility, says the master painter. Even blue should know it began as stone. Elsewhere, in the shadow of a Bodhi tree, a few monks carve small votive stupas from clay, practice for the great sculptors in the valley below. The act of shaping, for them, is prayer by another name. No one hurries. There is no concept of schedule, only rhythm. Chant, work, eat, meditate, rest, chant again. Time here is not counted in hours, but in breaths. The midday meal, the bell rings again when the sun reaches its height. The monks gather in the refectory, a long hall with simple stone benches. They eat in silence, bowls balanced carefully in their palms. The meal is plain: rice, gruel, lentils. Sometimes a few pieces of dried fruit offered by villagers. Each monk eats slowly, not out of restraint, but out of gratitude. When the meal ends, they rinse their bowls, dry them in the sun, and place them upside down on the wall. A daily gesture that says, "We take nothing beyond what is given." Then comes the quiet hour, the monastery's softest silence. The air grows heavy with heat, and even the sparrows fall still. Monks retreat to their cells, where they sit in meditation, eyes half closed, breathing the dust that has gathered for centuries. It is said that in these hours, the valley itself seems to breathe with them. The afternoon, less. In the shaded portico, the younger monks gather around the abbot. He speaks rarely, but when he does, they listen as if to wind passing through reeds. "Remember," he says, drawing a line in the dust with his finger, "our task is not to escape the world, but to see it clearly." He smooths the line away. And when we see clearly, even dust becomes divine. The novices nod, though few fully understand. Still, they carry the phrase like a stone in their robes, polishing it in their minds each day until it glows with meaning. At Takht-i-Bahi as dusk falls, shadows stretch long across the courtyards. The day's work ends, but no one marks its ending. Lamps are lit again, tiny stars flickering within the monastery's walls. The air smells of ghee, of stone cooling after heat, of time itself slowing. The monks chant once more, their voices softer now, almost a lullaby to the mountains. The sound carries faintly down to the valley below, where sculptors and farmers pause their work and listen without knowing why. In the dark, the monastery seems to float above the world, a fortress of silence, glowing faintly like the memory of a dream. The quiet between prayers when the last bell fades. The monks retire to their cells. One by one, the lamps go out. The stars take their place. Somewhere in the corridors, a pot cools with a faint crack. Dust settles slowly on the stone floors, thin, pale, sacred. Tomorrow it will be swept away again, and the act of sweeping will itself be prayer. For now, only stillness remains, the kind of silence that hums, as if the valley were listening to its own heartbeat. Closing reflection centuries will pass. The chants will fall silent. The murals fade. The monks' names vanish from memory. But the dust of Takht-i-Bahi will remain, carrying within it the rhythm of their devotion, and if, one day, a traveler brushes that dust from a ruined wall, perhaps they will pause, not knowing why, and feel a calm they cannot name, because sometimes holiness leaves no scripture, no sound, no monument, only dust that remembers divinity. The wind from the north carried new scents that year: resin, camel sweat, strange spices that did not belong to the valley. Even the monks, who rarely noticed the changing winds, felt the difference. From the upper terraces of Takht-i-Bahi, they could see tiny caravans shimmering in the distance, winding slowly along the mountain tracks. It was not unusual. Gandhara had always been a place between places, a pause on the road linking India, Persia, and the far-off Mediterranean world. Yet each new arrival seemed to whisper something larger, that even silence could not stay untouched forever. The gate of the monastery visitors rarely entered the sacred compound. They stopped at the lower gate, where a few lay brothers received them, exchanging food, herbs, or medicine for small coins. The monastery's rule forbade monks from handling money directly. Yet they handled ideas with care and curiosity. Once every few moons, a traveling scholar was permitted inside. They came dusty and worn from long journeys, men who carried scrolls wrapped in leather and spoke of distant kingdoms. They brought questions heavier than their packs, and the monks, who had built their lives on answers found in silence, listened. The Greek and the monk one afternoon, when the light turned golden on the courtyard stones, a foreigner arrived, a man with pale skin and a short beard, his tunic frayed from travel. He called himself Dion, a scholar from Bactria, who had once studied in the ruins of Ayakonim. He bowed deeply before the abbot, who sat beneath the Bodhi tree. "I have come to learn why your Buddha smiles," Dion said. "In our statues, the gods rarely smile. They command, they conquer, they endure, but they do not smile." The abbot smiled faintly, as if answering without words. "Because the Buddha does not wish to be worshipped," he said softly. "He wishes to be understood." Dion stayed for many days. He joined the monks in their morning chants, sat cross-legged, though his knees protested, and asked endless questions about form and meaning. He spoke of Greek proportion, of symmetry and beauty as measured by mathematics. One evening, as they walked along the monastery's edge, Dion pointed toward a broken stupa where a fragment of sculpture lay half buried in dust. "Our sculptors carve to make gods look human," he said. "And we carve," replied the abbot, "to remind humans they are already divine." Dion did not reply. The sun was setting, and the mountains had turned the color of fading copper. Somewhere below, a bell rang, and both men stood in silence, listening as if to the turning of an age, the debate of Shapson, the months that followed. Dion's presence quietly shifted the monastery's rhythms. A few of the younger monks began sketching figures with new grace, not the flat, austere forms of old Gandharan reliefs, but bodies with softness and weight. He taught us to see shadow as another form of light. Some elders frowned. They feared that beauty might distract from meaning. But others saw no conflict, for to them truth was simply form made clear. One evening, as the abbot watched the novices work by lamplight, he said to Dion, "You have brought us a mirror, and in it we see our silence shaped differently." Dion bowed. "And you," he said, "have shown me that silence can be carved." Thus, Without intention or decree, the art of Gandhara began to change. The serene Buddha took on the calm of Apollo. Draped robes fell in Grecian folds. The eyes softened. The smile, still gentle, still knowing, became the bridge between worlds. The record-keeper among the monks was a man named Aniruddha, whose task was to copy the monastery's history onto palm leaves. He wrote slowly, his letters rounded and steady. One day, he paused mid-sentence and looked up from his script. "How strange," he murmured. "We record births and deaths, donations and repairs, but not the moment when one world meets another." He dipped his pen again. "Today I will write of the Greek who taught our silence to curve." His record would survive in fragments, scattered leaves, later found by archaeologists centuries later. Their edges burned, their ink faint but legible, and in one margin, faded by time, someone had written a note in Prakrit. He came from far away, but his eyes recognized peace. Dust in the Aras, more travelers came and went, merchants, envoys, wandering monks, the air of Takht-i-Bahi filled with the hum of languages. Sanskrit blended with Greek, Persian, and Gandhari. The monks listened as if to a chorus of rivers, each flowing into the same sea. Sometimes a caravan would leave behind small gifts, a bronze coin, a shard of glass from Syria, a folded scrap of parchment with tiny writing. The monks accepted these offerings not for their worth, but as proof that thought itself could travel. And yet, even as the world grew louder beyond their walls, their inner rhythm held steady. Morning chants still began at dawn. Bowls were still rinsed and placed upside down. Dust still gathered each night, only to be swept again by patient hands. An unsettling dream one night. The abbot dreamed of the Buddha standing between two mountains, one shaped like Greece, the other like India. In the dream, both peaks bowed toward him until their shadows touched. When he awoke, he said nothing, but called the sculptors at dawn. He told them to carve a new Buddha, not as ruler, not as ascetic, but as one who listens. The figure would have the robe of the West and the calm of the East, eyes half closed, lips curved in eternal composure. And so they worked. For weeks, the monastery echoed with the tapping of chisels. When it was finished, the abbot stood before the statue and said, "This is not ours alone. It belongs to all who seek silence." The passing of Dion when the snows came. Dion prepared to leave. The monks gathered in the courtyard to bid him farewell. He had grown thinner, but his eyes were bright with a quiet gratitude. "I came to find the reason your gods smile," he said softly. "Now I know. They smile because they do not need worship, only understanding." The abbot placed a small clay stupa in his palm. "Carry this," he said, "so that when you are far away, silence may still find you." Dion bowed deeply. "And if I never return?" The abbot smiled. "Then perhaps you will become part of the dust that teaches others." And so Dion departed, walking down the mountain road until the mist swallowed him. Echoes that winter. The monks continued their work. They copied new sutras, chanted beneath the cold stars, and swept the same dust each morning. But now, when they carved or painted, something subtle had changed, a grace that had no name, born of foreign friendship and quiet learning. Centuries later, when explorers uncovered the ruins of Takht-i-Bahi, they found fragments of statues, faces serene, bodies poised, robes draped in Grecian folds, and though time had erased their makers' names, each fragment seemed to hum with the same truth, that stillness and beauty can coexist, and that silence, too, can travel. Closing reflection. The monks of Takht-i-Bahi never sought to change the world. Yet, by welcoming a few travelers and listening more than they spoke, they carried a civilization's calm into the farthest corners of history. Their dust would scatter, but their silence would endure, carried by stone, by art, by those who once paused here to listen. And perhaps that is the quietest kind of power, to remain unseen, yet unforgettable. For many years the monastery went on exactly as before. Seasons slipped over the hills like thin veils. The same bell rang at dawn, the same footsteps echoed through the corridors. But time, even when unnoticed, works patiently, softening edges, loosening mortar, fading voices, a grain at a time. The monks did not speak of decline. They did not even notice it. To live without expectation was their practice. Yet the world beyond their walls had begun to change in ways they could no longer ignore. The empty road, the caravans, grew fewer. Where once merchants had come with bundles of silk and jars of resin, now only wind traveled the passes. The Kushan kings who had protected the valley fell, and new rulers, first distant, then nearer, no longer looked north for wisdom. Sometimes a messenger from Peshawar arrived, asking for taxes in the name of a power the monks did not recognize. The abbot would bow, offer food and water, and send him away with nothing more than a blessing. The traveler's road, once a ribbon of noise and trade, became a scar of silence winding through the hills. The crumbling edges rain began to find new cracks in the old walls. One summer, lightning struck the upper stupa, splitting its finial clean in two. The monks gathered the fragments and laid them carefully in the courtyard. Everything must learn to bow, said the abbot. They repaired what they could, using clay mixed with rice husks. But each repair seemed to birth another fracture. Still, the routines continued. Chant, sweep, copy, meditate, sleep. They did not fear ruin. To them, decay was simply another form of stillness, a long exhalation after centuries of breath. The new voices, one evening, the youngest novice heard drums in the distance. He climbed to the terrace and saw torches flickering in the valley. Armies were passing foreigners again, speaking a tongue none of them understood. The next morning, travelers brought news. Gandhara had changed hands. Temples burned in the plains. Statues were broken for their gold. The abbot called the monks together. If the world wishes to forget us, he said, we shall help it forget gently. And so they hid what they could. Scrolls sealed in clay jars, statues buried beneath stone, manuscripts coated in oil to resist dampness. Then they resumed their silence. The last winter, the snows came early that year. For weeks the valley lay under white stillness. No visitors came. The monks rationed rice and melted ice for water. One by one, their lamps grew dim. At night, they gathered in the main shrine. The abbot's voice, thinner now, led the final chant. He spoke of impermanence, of compassion, of the river that carries all forms into the sea. When dawn finally broke, the wind had swept the courtyard clean. The abbot was gone, his robe folded neatly beside the Bodhi tree. The novices buried him where the spring once flowed. They placed no marker, for, he had said, when dust remembers you, no stone need speak. Abandonment years drifted by. Fewer monks remained. Some left to join monasteries farther east, others simply vanished down the silent road. One morning, the last 3 brothers walked out together. They did not lock the gates. There had never been locks. They carried nothing but their bowls and the rhythm of their breath by nightfall. Takht-i-Bahi belonged to the wind. Inside, the murals cracked. Bats took roost in the cells. Rain filled the cisterns again, and weeds grew through the courtyards. The sound of chanting became memory, yet the dust still settled every evening in the same patient way, as if performing the ritual alone. Centuries of quiet. For nearly 1,000 years the monastery slept. Travelers passed the ruins without knowing their names. Shepherds grazed flocks among the broken walls. Children played where monks had once meditated, and still, beneath the layers of time, the echo of voices lingered. The dust itself seemed to hum faintly when disturbed, a resonance too soft to hear but too steady to forget. Rediscovery in the 19th century. Explorers from faraway lands reached the valley. They brushed away soil from carved reliefs and found faces half buried, serene, smiling, impossibly calm. They measured, photographed, catalogued. They spoke of Greco-Buddhist art and cross-cultural synthesis, but none of their notes captured the stillness of the place, the way wind moved through the old courtyards, like breath remembering itself. A local villager, watching them work, said quietly, "The monks must still be here. You can feel them when the dust rises." The monks who remain today, Takht-i-Bahi stands partly restored, partly ruined. Tourists climb its terraces. Guides recite dates and dynasties. But if you pause near the inner shrine and close your eyes, you might hear something softer than sound, a rhythm, a low vibration, like the memory of chanting carried in stone. The dust still tastes faintly of sesame oil and smoke. In sunlight, the sandstone glows warm, the same color it must have been when Dion the Greek sat beneath the Bodhi tree and asked why the Buddha smiled. Closing reflection, empires rose and fell. Names changed. Faiths collided and blended. Yet the monks of Takht-i-Bahi left behind no conquest, no manifesto, only patience turned into architecture. Their silence, once fragile, has proven stronger than any wall. It continues in the hum of wind through corridors, in the pause of every traveler who forgets to speak. And perhaps that is the final lesson of the dust and divinity they served, that to disappear quietly is sometimes the most enduring way to remain. Long before the first dawn touched the spires of Takht-i-Bahi, a whisper was already moving through the hills, the sound of hooves and wooden wheels, of bells swaying on camel necks. It was the road itself, exhaling. The merchants of Gandhara did not march. They drifted, as if led by the rhythm of distance. Their road began at the valley floor, where the river Swat slid past fields of barley and blue lotus, and climbed gently toward the mountain passes that would carry them into the world. The shape of the caravan at dawn looked less like a procession and more like a waking dream. From afar, it shimmered lines of mules and oxen, silk-covered bundles stacked like sleeping forms. Each merchant wrapped his face against the dust. Each carried a small amulet carved from soapstone, stamped with a lotus or wheel. Some said it was for luck. Others said it was to remind them that all journeys, even the long ones, eventually circle back to stillness. The lead camel wore a bell tuned to a low hum, not bright or cheerful, but resonant, like a monk's final chant. When the caravan moved, the bell gave the road its heartbeat. The merchants dawn, they rose before light. No voices, only gestures, a nod, a clink of iron pots, the crackle of last night's coals, revived. Tea brewed in dented brass cups, thick with salt and yak butter. Someone recited a half-remembered prayer to the goddess of safe crossings. The older traders tied their ledgers shut with twine. The younger ones checked the ropes on the silk bundles, green from China, red from Bactria, blue dyed with indigo from the Sind plains. When the first beam of sunlight slid down the slopes, the caravan began to move slowly in deliberate silence. Their shadows stretched long across the pale dust, as if time itself were walking beside them. The roads within roads, the path was never a single line. The Gandharan merchants followed an invisible network, donkey trails and river bends, forest shortcuts, mountain passes that appeared only when snow melted. From the east came caravans laden with silk and tea. From the west, lapis from Badakhshan and saffron from Persia. From the south, coral and cotton from the coast. At every crossing, someone would pause and whisper a greeting to the unseen spirits of the road, a small nod to the countless feet that had passed before. For these merchants, the path was not a route, but a living memory. It held their father's footsteps, and those of strangers they would never meet. The midday haze, by noon, the air shimmered. The scent of sandalwood mixed with sweat and dust. Bells jingled faintly, wheels creaked. Birds circled overhead, curious but distant. When the caravan stopped for rest, traders sat beneath sparse tamarisk trees. They shared dried figs and lentil cakes, sometimes stories, though rarely laughter. The road encouraged a different kind of conversation, slow, unfinished, often swallowed by silence. Some took to polishing their scales or tallying goods. Others simply watched the horizon, where the mountains breathed in and out like sleeping animals. It was said that if you stared long enough at the heat rising off the sand, you could see the past flicker. Processions of older caravans, long gone but still shimmering faintly in the air. The night encampment evening was the most sacred time. Fires burned low, ringed by stones. Tea boiled again, and the merchants' silhouettes flickered like figures painted on silk. From the dark came the sounds of unseen animals, jackals, perhaps, or distant horses. Someone strummed a two-stringed lute, its melody simple and circular. Another hummed an old Gandharan lullaby said to calm, frightened camels. Above them, the stars traced faint lines that mirrored the caravan's path, constellations that seemed to move with them, slow and faithful, before sleep. The oldest merchant would whisper the same words he had said for 40 years. The road has no beginning. The road has no end. We are only its breath. And the others, half asleep already, would nod the scent of continuance when morning came again. The road accepted them back, as if it had been waiting, patient and kind. There was no destination to hurry toward. The traders knew that each mile brought them closer and farther in the same motion. The world, after all, was round. Silk left China, passed through Gandhara, crossed the deserts, and returned as rumor, as perfume, as memory to the merchants. That was enough. Their wealth was not in gold or goods, but in the soft accumulation of horizons. The section closes here. The road has only begun to breathe. When the caravan descended into the Peshawar plain, it felt as if the air itself changed texture, heavier with dust, warmer, tinged faintly with the scent of burnt sesame oil. For weeks they had known only the rhythm of bells and wind, but now other sounds intruded: hammer on bronze, the chatter of distant crowds, the whine of potters' wheels turning. They had arrived at Pushkalavati, one of Gandhara's old trading cities, where rivers braided together like the threads of a merchant's dream. Here silk met stone, prayer met coin, and stories moved faster than caravans. The gate of smells, long before the merchants could see the city walls, they could smell them. Smoke from cooking fires, the sharp sweetness of fresh indigo dye, the faint temps of copper being melted into lamps. Pushkalavati had no grand gate of marble or guards in gold. Its entrance was marked by two half-broken pillars, carved once with winged lions, the kind borrowed from faraway Persia. Between them, children played with wooden tops, and stray dogs slept with the ease of citizens. The caravan paused, as it always did, to let the city breathe them in. Then, slowly, they entered, one bell, one wheel at a time. The bazaar that never slept inside the walls, the world widened. The bazaar was not loud in the way of modern markets. Its noise was steady, like a long inhale. A copper merchant hammered sheet metal in time with a Persian lute. A spice seller's apprentice sneezed into the scent of turmeric. The traders of Gandhara had mastered a calm chaos, lines of woven mats laid with salt, jade, rice, silk, and stone figurines. Between them, language itself became a marketplace. Greek mingled with Prakrit. Persian phrases brushed against the soft vowels of Sanskrit. Bargains were made not with shouting but with small gestures, nods, and the universal lift of an eyebrow that meant, perhaps, a little less. Every face carried a story from somewhere else: a Sogdian with a scar that stretched across his nose, a Bactrian woman wearing silver anklets, heavy with dust, a Buddhist novice buying lamp oil with quiet reverence. Trade was not simply about goods. It was about the slow exchange of memory. The courtyard of Waitsat, the bazaar's center, stood an open courtyard, where weights were tested. Flat stones, carved with faint numerals, lay in rows, and merchants gathered to compare measures. There was a ritual to it. One man would pour grain into a bronze cup, another would watch the balance tilt, and both would nod, as if agreeing on something far older than the trade itself. To watch them was to witness the discipline of trust. Each measure was an act of faith, faith that the grain weighed true, that the buyer would return, that the road would remain open. The caravanserai of Shadowsat. The traders retreated to the caravanserai, a rectangular courtyard surrounded by arched rooms where travelers could sleep, cook, or barter by lamplight within its walls. The dust settled differently. Time slowed, conversations softened. Some merchants spread their goods across woven mats to tempt evening buyers. Ivory combs, coral beads, and mirrors from Taxila, whose reflections held a golden hue. One corner smelled of butter tea, another of sandalwood. Every evening, stories flowed like quiet streams. A Greek trader spoke of cities built entirely from marble, A Chinese emissary described towers that touched the clouds, but always the Gandharan merchants listened more than they spoke. They were patient men. They knew that silence earned more trust than clever words. The tax collector, as night deepened, the tax collector arrived, not harsh, not cruel, but inevitable. He carried a ledger made from palm leaves bound in string, and wore a robe that had once been white. His face bore the same faint expression of boredom shared by bureaucrats across centuries. He counted bundles, noted origins, sealed agreements with wax. Every 10th bale of silk, every 20th jar of spice, a fraction offered to the city, to the order that allowed the road to breathe. No one argued. Even the smallest traders knew that paying was easier than protest. The road might have no beginning or end, but the law always had a doorway. The monks among merchants among the traders walked monks in saffron robes, their alms bowls reflecting the firelight. They were not buyers or sellers, yet they were everywhere, accepting small offerings, blessing scales, or simply listening to the noise of commerce as one might listen to rain. Some monks carried small Gandharan sculptures, serene Buddhas with Greek drapery folds. They said these images were bought by pilgrims from across the mountains, merchants of the soul, traveling just as far as the traders, but toward a quieter profit in the evenings, when the bazaar's noise thinned into murmurs. The monks would chant verses that drifted above the market like faint smoke, and for a brief moment, even the tax collector seemed gentler. The currency of trust coins changed hands. Constantly, silver drachmas stamped with Hellenistic kings, copper coins bearing the image of local rulers, even shells from distant coasts, but beyond metal. Another currency ruled the market: reputation. A merchant who cheated once would find his next deal met with silence. A trader who offered tea to a stranger might earn passage through a difficult border weeks later. One archaeologist, Charles Masson, wrote in his journal, "Every fragment seems to breathe with a kind of patience. It is as if the earth itself had been waiting to be remembered." Soon, teams arrived with notebooks, spades, and brushes. They dug where goats had grazed, and the earth responded, offering pieces of marble drapery, stone heads of serene Buddhas, fragments of friezes showing scenes of the Buddhas, life carved in unmistakably Hellenic style. The world began to speak of Greco-Buddhist art, a phrase too tidy for something so tender. The unearthed faces. When the first sculpted face emerged from the soil, eyes half closed, lips curved in an eternal half-smile, the archaeologists held their breath. The local laborers looked on quietly. Some touched the statue's forehead as if greeting an old friend. One of the excavators later wrote, "They are not ruins, they are dreams in stone. They have been sleeping." The museums of London and Lahore, filled with Gandharan relics, heads, hands, friezes, fragments of halos. But something essential, the silence of their birthplace, could not be boxed or labeled. It remained in the valleys, in the wind moving through the reeds by the Swat River, the spirit that stayed even after its rediscovery. Gandhara never truly woke. It remained gentle, quiet, almost shy in the world's gaze. Unlike the grand civilizations that demanded recognition, Gandhara seemed content to be remembered softly in museum corners, in travelers' sketches, in the sigh of the mountain wind, the sculptor's calm, the merchant's patience, the monk's quiet rhythm. All of it still lingered, invisible but persistent. In the villages of Swat, artisans still carve soft gray stone. They no longer call it Buddhist art or Greek art. They simply call it their craft, and when the hammer strikes, echoing faintly in the valley, it sounds almost like memory returning, and ending without end. The fading faces of Gandhara remind us that history does not die, it only rests. Civilizations breathe in and out like sleeping giants. Some wake again, some dream forever. If you were to walk through those valleys today, you might still find fragments of old monasteries, doorsteps worn smooth by vanished feet. You might see a half-buried Buddha face, eyes closed as if mid-meditation, and if you listen, really listen, you might hear what the archaeologists could not, the quiet hum of the past. All art is a breath caught in stone. A modern sculptor once said of Gandhara, "It reminds us that silence, too, leaves an impression." If you were to stand in the Peshawar Valley around the middle of the 19th century, you would not have guessed that beneath the thorny bushes and clay hills lay an entire forgotten civilization. The land, by then, had long changed hands, from Mauryan to Kushan, from Sassanid to Ghaznavid, from Mughal to British. Empires rose and fell, and each brought new names for old places. Yet, under the layers of conquest and soil, Gandhara's old faces still slept patient, eroded, waiting. The rediscovery of Gandhara did not begin with thunder or treasure, but with dust. British officers stationed in the northwest frontier, many trained in surveying and mapping, began noticing peculiar things: broken statues in fields, half-buried stupas near streams, fragments of reliefs used as house stones in villages. Locals called them Purani Morsian, the old idols. To them, these were remnants of an age before Islam, before even known kings, and best left untouched. But to a certain kind of mind, the archaeologist in embryo, these fragments whispered of mystery. One such man was Charles Masson, a deserter from the British Army who turned into a wanderer and chronicler. Around the 1830s, Masson roamed the Kabul and Peshawar valleys, writing in his journals about mounds that villagers said were cursed. He collected coins, shards, and small sculptures, many showing serene faces with wavy hair and calm eyes. Masson didn't know it then, but he was touching the earliest layer of what would later be called Greco-Buddhist art. He wrote that the land abounds with vestiges of ancient labor, a phrase that, though simple, described Gandhara's silent endurance perfectly. By the late 19th century, Alexander Cunningham, the founder of the Archaeological Survey of India, began piecing together these scattered reports. To him, archaeology was not about gold or fame, it was about order. He believed that the soil itself was a document, and every mound could be read if one was patient enough. Cunningham's surveys led him to places like Jamelgarh, Takht-i-Bahi, and Sari Balil, where monks had once meditated among terraces and courtyards. He saw fallen pillars, stucco heads, and reliquaries that still contained traces of ash and bone. "They are the witnesses," he wrote in his notes, "of a faith that once bound half the world." But the first true awakening of Gandharatha, moment when its sleeping art rose, again came under John Marshall, a young archaeologist with a sense of reverence for ruins. In 1911, when he became Director General of the Archaeological Survey, Marshall turned his eyes to the northwest frontier. What he found there stunned even him. Layer upon layer of Buddhist structures, chechas, monasteries, stupas, each revealing new patterns of belief and craftsmanship. He called it a city of silence, a phrase that would echo in every later description of Gandhara at Takht-i-Bahi. The diggers worked slowly, sometimes spending weeks on a single courtyard. They cleared rubble carefully, for even a careless shovel stroke might erase centuries. What they unearthed was astonishing. Meditation cells with soot on the walls, suggesting that monks once lit oil lamps there. Stairways leading to assembly halls, and niches that once held statues of Buddha, bodhisattvas, and divine attendants. Each face they found bore a different emotion: tranquility, compassion, sometimes even sorrow. Local laborers worked alongside British supervisors. Some of them began to name the statues, calling one Baba Musafir, the traveling saint, or Busarg, the old man. They did not know the doctrines of Mahayana or Hinayana, yet they felt an instinctive respect. Often, at the end of a day's work, they would light incense or murmur small prayers near the uncovered stupas, as if apologizing for disturbing sleep. In that gesture, the long continuum of reverence, the thread connecting past to present, quietly persisted. If you were to walk through Marshall's excavation notes, you would see more than just archaeology. You would see patience as a moral act. Every find was logged, every measurement drawn by hand. Sometimes months passed without discovery, and the diggers grew weary. Dust filled their lungs, and summer heat baked the mounds until tools grew too hot to hold. Yet, when the first complete Buddha head emerged, its hair curled in the classical Greek style, its lips almost smiling, the camp fell silent. Even the chatter of the crows paused. The photograph that Marshall took of that head would later become iconic. The serene expression of enlightenment, carved not by Indian hands alone, nor Greek, but by a meeting of worlds. Art historians later coined the term Greco-Buddhist synthesis, but to those who found it, it was simply beautiful. The fusion was not of politics or empire, but of imagination, proof that peace and art could cross borders even when armies could not. From that point, Gandhara's fame spread beyond the frontier. Museums in London, Calcutta, and Lahore began displaying its sculptures, the calm Buddhas, the draped bodhisattvas. The scenes from Jataka tales carved in grey schistol spoke of a forgotten aesthetic, one that valued stillness over spectacle. Western scholars, seeing the flowing robes and idealized faces, began to draw parallels with Apollo and Hermes. But for those who lived near these mounds, the farmers and stonemasons of Swabi and Mardin, the art was not foreign. "He looks like one of us," an old villager once told a visiting scholar. "Only his eyes are more at peace." As the decades passed, new generations of archaeologists continued the work. In the 1930s and 1940s, Indian and Pakistani scholars took the lead, preserving what colonial collectors had to eagerly exported. The Peshawar Museum, established in 1907, became the quiet heart of Gandharan art, a place where stone faces looked out from glass cases, serene and undemanding. The museum itself was like a monastery in miniature, dimly lit, cool, and filled with the scent of age. After partition in 1947, Many feared that the fragile legacy of Gandhara might be lost to the new boundaries. But instead, local scholars, such as Ahmed Hazandani and Fadola Sarai, carried forward the work with renewed devotion. For them, Gandhara was not just a historical curiosity, it was a shared heritage that transcended religion or nationality. Dani often said, "In these faces, you can see the soul of the frontier half-warrior, half-monk." In the 1960s and 70s, excavations at Takht-i-Bahi and Shaj Gaderi revealed even more astonishing finds. Relic caskets inscribed in Kharosti, coins bearing the names of Indo-Greek kings, and wall paintings that still retained faint colors. One inscription, dated roughly to the 2nd century CE, mentioned the donation of a stupa by a merchant from Bactria. It was a reminder that Gandhara had always been open to the world, a crossroad rather than a kingdom. But even as knowledge deepened, loss crept in. Smuggling of artifacts became rampant. Ancient statues disappeared from sites overnight. Some reappeared in European galleries, others vanished entirely. The sleeping Buddhas, once lost to time, were now being lost against to greed, to indifference. A few local custodians tried to protect what they could, sometimes burying small relics back into the soil. Better to let them sleep, one said, than to let strangers sell their dreams. By the late 20th century, Gandhara's rediscovery entered a new phase, not through digging, but through reflection. Scholars began to realize that what mattered was not only the art but the silence surrounding it. The sculptors of Swat, the monks of Takht-i-Bahi, the merchants of the Silk Road all had lived in a rhythm alien to the modern world. Their patience, their slow mastery of craft, their belief that stone could hold compassion, these were values eroding in the face of speed and noise. In that sense, archaeology became a kind of meditation. Each artifact uncovered was less a find and more a conversation with time. The past did not simply reveal itself, it waited to be listened to. Every chisel mark on schist, every worn stair of a monastery, was a soft reply from history. We were here, and we endured quietly today. If you visit the Peshawar Museum, you can still see those faces lined up under gentle light, their half-smiles unbroken. Some are missing noses or ears. Others have cracks running through the forehead, yet their calmness endures. They seem to say, all things rise, all things fall, but peace, once carved, leaves a trace, even in ruin. And perhaps that is the most profound lesson of Gandhara's rediscovery, that even when history forgets, stone remembers. The men who dug up these faces did more than unearth art. They awakened patience in a restless age. But as the 21st century began, storms gathered again around these sleeping relics: wars, neglect, and the slow crumble of time. Could Gandhara's quiet strength endure once more? Could its dreaming Buddhas survive the noise of modernity? The answer, perhaps, lies not in the ruins, but in how we remember them. If you travel today through the valleys where Gandhara once breathed, through Swat and the gentle plains of Peshawar, you might find little to suggest that this land once carried enlightenment on its shoulders. The air hums with motorbikes, wheat fields shimmer in the afternoon sun, and the slopes of Takht-i-Bahi lie quietly under the watch of sparrows and the occasional school group. Yet, if you pause long enough, if you let the noise settle, the stillness begins to speak. That stillness is Gandhara's last gift. The ruins no longer glitter with gold, nor do monks chant through their corridors. The relics lie behind museum glass or under protective shelters, their once living silence preserved in fragments of schist and stucco. But the story of Gandhara did not truly end with its fall, nor even with its rediscovery. It lives now in the way the world looks at the meeting of past and present, at how art becomes a language for peace long after its makers have turned to dust. When the Kushan Empire began to weaken around the 3rd century CE, Gandhara's long twilight began. Trade routes shifted. New powers rose across Central Asia. The Silk Road, once a steady river of merchants and monks, turned uncertain under waves of invasion. The Greek influence faded, replaced by rougher forms, local adaptations of what had once been graceful and calm. Buddhism itself moved eastward, finding new breath in Central Asia and China. Gandhara, now a quiet borderland, began to dissolve into memory. At first, the decline was slow, barely noticeable. Monasteries still functioned, stupas were still repaired, and small pilgrim routes remained open. But the world beyond had changed. The wealth that had once flowed through Gandhara silks, lapis, sandalwood, saffron now bypassed it for other roads. Without trade, even devotion grew thin. The monks' cells fell silent, one by one. The last caretaker may have closed a wooden door, looked out at the hills, and whispered a final prayer before walking away. The wind took over the chanting. After that, centuries of dust followed centuries in which Gandhara was not forgotten, but simply not known. Villagers farmed near buried stupas without knowing what they were. The statues, eroded and half-buried, became part of the land's ordinary life. In some valleys, fragments of Buddha heads were used as weights or thresholds. In others, they were reburied to keep away bad luck. The sacred and the mundane folded together like layers of silt. Yet this forgetting was not destruction, it was a kind of protection. By being buried, Gandhara was preserved. Its art slept while empires came and went, while languages changed and maps redrew themselves. The soil, indifferent and patient, became its guardian. When British explorers and archaeologists arrived in the 19th century, they uncovered not ruins, but time capsules. Under each mound was not merely stone, but a world that had once been fully alive. And in that act of rediscovery, Gandhara began a second life, no longer as a living civilization, but as an idea that art could bridge continents, that beauty could be born of patience, that peace could have a face. In the quiet galleries of the Peshawar Museum, that idea still lingers. There, the Buddha sits not as a god, but as a teacher whose lesson outlasted the language it was carved in. His face is calm, his eyes half closed, seeing both inward and outward. Around him, fragments of narrative panels tell small forgotten stories of Mara's temptation, of the birth beneath the sal tree, of the first sermon under the Bodhi tree. The reliefs are dense, crowded with figures, yet their rhythm is slow. You could stare at one for hours and still feel you are missing something. Visitors pass by quietly. Children whisper questions that adults can't quite answer. Tourists take photos, though the statues seem immune to being captured. Sometimes, a monk from Thailand or Japan visits, bowing before the Gandharan Buddha with the reverence of one meeting an ancestor. In those moments, the room grows still, again the old silence returning, soft as dust. Outside, the world hums with modern chaos horns, phones, footsteps, but inside that still air, time folds. The sculptors of Swat, the monks of Takht-i-Bahi, the merchants of the Silk Road, they all seem near again, their work breathing faintly through the stone. But Gandhara's survival has not been effortless. The same valleys that once nourished enlightenment have also seen wars, neglect, and theft. During the late 20th century, many ancient sites suffered damage. Smugglers carved away faces, museums were looted, and entire reliefs vanished into private collections. For a while, it seemed the dream of Gandhara was breaking apart once more, this time not by time, but by greed. And yet, amid that loss, local caretakers and scholars quietly kept watch. In Swat, the Italian archaeological mission worked hand in hand with Pakistani archaeologists, restoring stupas and cataloging every fragment they could recover. In Mardin, local guides began protecting visitors and heritage alike. School teachers told children about Gandhara's art as a story of their land, not just as history in a book. The effort was small, almost invisible, but that is the nature of Gandhara. It endures quietly through small acts of preservation, through hands that still sweep the dust from old stones. The Jahanabad Buddha in Swat, a massive rock carving dating back to the 7th century, was damaged by extremists. For many, it felt like a wound that could never heal. But within a few years, local and international experts restored it, painstakingly, grain by grain. When the scaffolding finally came down, the Buddha's face re-emerged, softly smiling, as if it had never been gone. A villager nearby said something simple and profound. They broke it, but he did not stop smiling. That smile, perhaps, is the last message of Gandhara. Empires crumble, languages vanish, belief systems evolve, but the expression of compassion remains unchanged. The sculptors, who once chiseled stone in Swat, did not know they were shaping something eternal. They only knew their craft, their devotion, their rhythm. They worked slowly, patiently, guided by hands that remembered peace, even now. Modern sculptors and artists in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and beyond draw inspiration from those calm faces. Some try to recreate Gandharan forms using local clay or marble. Others reinterpret them digitally, rendering the same serenity in pixels. Each act, however small, keeps Gandhara alive, not as a ruin, but as a living philosophy. To be Gandharan is not to belong to a place, it is to believe that even the slowest, quietest work can outlast the noise of centuries. As the sun sets behind the hills of Takht-i-Bahi, the ruins turn gold for a few fleeting minutes. The shadows lengthen, and the stone begins to cool. The walls, though broken, still cast perfect lines across the ground. The birds roost in the same corners where monks once sat in meditation. You can almost hear the echo of a gong long vanished, or the rustle of robes in the wind. You realize that the place is not empty, it is simply listening. Gandhara listens still. It listens to time, to silence, to those who remember. And as you stand there, watching the light fade from gray stone to black, you might feel the weight of centuries press softly around you, not as a burden, but as a comfort. You understand, suddenly, why they carved those faces with such patience. They were not making idols or monuments. They were making a memory that could sleep without fear, a memory that, when the world grew loud again, would wake and remind us what stillness looks like. And so, Gandhara sleeps beneath the dust, but it dreams, too. It dreams through the cracked smiles of its Buddhas, through the patient hands that still dust off relics, through the stories whispered by those who wander its ruins. It reminds you that civilizations do not die. They fade into the soil, waiting for someone gentle enough to listen again. Perhaps the next listener is you.